reach out to the sky. I found my way, I found my way. I was in the dark against it all, but made it through the day, 'cause I found my way, I found my way. In bad times, I know I'll be okay, 'cause I found my way. 'Cause I found my way. 'Cause I found my way.
Excited to be hosting one of our Entrepreneur Club events to mark International Women's Day and also to celebrate our very distinguished guest, Dr. Patricia O'Lynn. If I were to tell you her entire resume and her entire CV, there would be no time left for Patricia to speak. So what I will just say is that Patricia has a huge wealth of experience in leadership and management and consulting in that area. She is a PhD in education and has a huge amount of experience in that area. And she's also an entrepreneur, and today is going to be sharing a bit about her journey as an entrepreneur, but also her journey and more generally as well. And we're so delighted to have Patricia today. We're also really delighted to have some very distinguished guests with us here in person. We have senior management and lecturers from the National Institute of Technology in Toyama, Japan, who have joined us here today in person. And we're so delighted to welcome them. And of course, we have our students and our staff as well. So thank you so much, everyone. And Patricia, thank you so much. We'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And let me just say, first of all, it is a privilege to be here at SERC this afternoon. A warm welcome to everybody online as well as in person. And it's an incredible honour to be recognised as SERC's International Woman of the Year. So, will we make a start? As Natasha said, I am an entrepreneur, but by night. So by day, I teach leadership and management. And whenever I was preparing today's session, I thought, how can I explain the best way to align your values to your business? And what popped into my mind is this strategic management exercise I get my students to do called Lost in the Wilderness. And it goes a little bit like this. I tell the students, you're off on a fishing trip with your 4 buddies to the Canadian Rockies. Your 2 guides have landed before you ahead of time in your isolated cabin. That means that you and your friends are flying in a tiny airplane across the Canadian Rockies to get to your destination. But because you're so excited, you allow the pilot to take you off course to see a desolate volcano stump. In trying to get back on course, things go terribly wrong. There's engine failure, the plane starts descending at a rapid speed, and the next thing you know, trees come up and hit you. You've met the ground, and unfortunately, you have crashed. You are stranded in the wilderness. Now, sadly, everyone has survived. Your 4 buddies, bar the captain. The pilot is dead. But before you crash landed, he said, the plane is going to land in the direction of the cabin. You're about 20 miles away from where you need to be. 2 of your buddies are injured. One has a head injury, another one has a leg injury, but it's not fatal, and they will survive. And at this stage, I tell students, imagine you're under 34. There's no such thing as a mobile phone. And this is when things get really interesting. It's dusk in the Canadian Rockies. It never really gets totally dark. It's kind of twilight, so you should be able to see where you're going. And more importantly, you can salvage a maximum of 10 items from the plane. As you will see, they are up on screen. Take a second to study them and try to imagine exactly what the students are going to do next. For me, this is when things get super interesting. Panic sets in. The leaders, the natural born leaders in the group, stand up and start commanding the group. This is what we're going to do. This is our course of action. This is what we're going to do. They all get through all the different materials. They pick 10 out straight away. They think about nothing. And next thing you know, they always pick the whiskey. The whiskey comes no matter what. And they set off on their hike. The best plans. We're 20 miles away. The plane's pointed in the direction. So over 5 days, we'll walk 4 miles. We'll stop, factor in time to have a drink of whiskey. We'll be hungover the next morning, but we'll get going. We'll make it. And sadly, every single year, no matter the group of students, I have to tell them that within 3 days, you're dead. You have failed the task, and here's why. You're lost in the wilderness. You have no map. You don't even have a compass. And for these students, believe you me, they've never heard of the Northern Star. When I talk to them about it, they think I'm talking about a coffee company. So the students are essentially stranded. Now at this stage, things get even more interesting. They refuse defeat. They start arguing with me. And that's when they point out, we snuck the flares in. We took the flares with, there's 3 of them. I say, okay, so you're stuck in the wilderness, you're lost, you don't know what's going to happen, you've got these flares. What are you going to do? The next thing you know, they're just setting the flares off. We're going to set 3 flares off because we need help. I say, okay, who's coming to find you? Because nobody knows where you are, but you need help. And isn't this just so reflective for me of the entrepreneurial burnout journey? Why is that? From no age we're told we have to work. We have to work really hard. Why is that? Because we have to be special. We need to get to the top. We need to climb the ladder, run those stairs. We have to be the best. And why do we have to be the best? Because we need to make money. But it's not enough to make money. If you're tired, you just have to keep going. It doesn't matter if you're sick, keep going. It doesn't matter if you work yourself to death. You keep going. And why? Because you have to win. You have to win at all costs. And see, the first time you win, it's not enough. You have to keep winning. You have to win again because then you need more. More, more, more. More money, more power, more prestige, more leadership. You have to be better. You always have to be better. You're never good enough. And for me, this is where my burnout journey started. It wasn't enough to have a law degree, to have a master's, to have a diploma in leadership and management. I needed to get a PhD. But it wasn't enough to work on a PhD. Then I had to stand for election while getting the PhD. That wasn't enough. I had to work. I had to work all over Northern Ireland and get all this experience to prove that whenever I had the qualification and I was elected, then I could do a proper entrepreneurial job. I had to travel while I was doing this. I had to give international speeches and conference speeches, and I had to grind, do daily repetitive tests. Grind like the way you would grind coffee. And more interestingly, you had to embrace the grind. You had to enjoy it. And do you know why? Because it wasn't about the work. I just had to be a female boss, whatever that's supposed to mean. You know, like Karen Brady, dare I say, Michelle Mone. And I read their books, and what both of these women said is you have to get to the top. If you're a strong woman, you get to the top. And it's not just about getting to the top. If it's tough, you fight your way to the top. So you work, work, work. And it's not just enough to work and grind and be the best. You do things that no one else can ever do. And if you don't do them, if you can't do them, then you're weak. Worse than being weak, you're a failure. So as 50 Cent says, you get rich or die trying, right? Right? No, completely wrong. And for me, this is everything that's wrong with the narrative about entrepreneurship and leadership and management in modern society. We are literally teaching our young people how to get lost in the wilderness. Because what happens if you have no sense of your purpose? You don't know your general direction. Well, the next thing is you realize, okay, I have no purpose, I have no general direction, so I can't plot a course. And essentially, you end up burnt out, as most of our entrepreneurs do. And for me, this is why I'm so passionate about this exercise with our students. I don't want to just teach them how to manage projects, how to be leaders and how to be entrepreneurs. I want to teach them how to look after themselves. And so let's draw the correlations between lost in the wilderness and being an entrepreneur. When you're lost in the wilderness, you don't know where you're going, you're physically isolated, but at times if you're an entrepreneur, you're isolated as well. You feel that you have to be on your own to really focus to deliver. And then comes the uncertainty and stress. It feels like it's life or death. In the wilderness, you have anxiety about surviving, but as an entrepreneur, you do as well. You have pressure about financial instability and the fear of failure, and then the decision making. One wrong decision in the wilderness and it's game over. And somehow things have become that high stakes for our entrepreneurs as well. They are so stressed about making decisions, about getting things right. What do we do if things go wrong? Then when it comes to managing their resources, it's also a matter of life and death. It's not just about rationing your food or getting water. It's also about managing your finances, your time, and your man or woman power. But this is where we can begin to celebrate a little bit, because it's not high stakes and it's not life or death. If you are an entrepreneur and you get lost in the wilderness, the great thing is you're not going to die. You have the opportunity when you're lost to take stock, to reflect, to consider why you're burnt out and find a new course of action. And that's when you can set your flares off, and that's what happened for me. I realised I was on the wrong course of action, didn't know my purpose, didn't have a compass, couldn't plot the map, and so I set off my flares. I asked for help. And there were 3 of them, just like in the exercise I give my students. The first one, Rekha Patel Harrison, MBA, is an NLP coach, an expert, a good friend of mine. Cara Mackin, who is a really successful businesswoman. And then also Nikki Dickens, CEO of Profit with a Purpose. I set 3 flares off, and these are the ladies, the international women that I want to honour today that came to my rescue. Rekha started off and she said, you need to have a compass. And for me, I've always been interested in navigation and in maps and all the rest. And I said to her, why do I need a compass? And she said, it doesn't matter if you're stranded in the middle of your entrepreneurial journey. If you know your value compass, it'll always point you the right way. It'll just give you options of where you need to go. I said, okay. So she said, let's look at your compass at the minute. You're in politics, you want to start a business, you love leadership and management, you're in academia as well. How do you feel your compass is playing out? And I said, well, my North Star is nepotism. She says, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, in politics, it's not really about merit. It's who you know more than what you know. And I don't like it. It makes me feel like I'm in survival mode. If I say the wrong thing, everything's going to go wrong. She said, okay, take that down. What does that mean for your root and your being? And I said, well, it's not about other people. It's not about the community. For me, it feels like it's about self-interest and preservation. So, okay. She said, look east. What do you see? I said, exclusion. She goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, if you look west, at the minute in politics, all I see is narrow-mindedness. There's no opportunity to connect and grow. If you do, you're doing it in a nepotistic way for self-preservation and self-interest. And to me, at its core, that just feels exclusionary. I was in survival mode. So, Rekha said, let's sit down. She said, the Patricia O'Lynn I know does not stand for nepotism, exclusion, self-interest, or narrow-mindedness. She navigates complexity. That's her North Star. If something's difficult, she finds a way through. And what she's rooted in when she's finding her way through is social justice, connecting with people, being a voice for the marginalised. And when she looks east, she uses her expertise in order to do that, in order to connect. And when she looks west and she sees narrow-mindedness, she uses all of those values to challenge the dominant rhetoric that's hurting people in our society so poorly. I said, okay, but that doesn't really sound like me. She said, let's work on it. Think about your North Star. What's your end goal? And I said, I want autonomy. I don't want freedom. I want autonomy to make my own decisions at my own will and chase my own desires. Not negatively, but positively, to develop expertise, to work with excluded people, to give them a voice, to train every day, to learn, and then more importantly, to work with sincerity, to teach people what I've learned myself. And when I'm looking west, I'm unashamed to say it's about wealth. Not just in the financial sense, but in the personal sense, in the physical sense, in the health sense, in the social sense. Wealth in our society has been framed as such a negative thing, but guess what? It cross-cuts every section of our lives. And with that compass well and truly set in place, I was then able to look a little bit further towards my North Star. The thing I love about the North Star that many people don't know is regardless of how much the sky moves around it, it's more or less constant. It doesn't move, and that's how people can navigate their way using the North Star. Cue Nikki Dickens. Nikki Dickens is the CEO of Profit for Purpose, a company that helps early stage entrepreneurs like me work out their North Star and how they're going to deliver for the community. And the first question she asked me, okay, you have your general sense of direction, but where do you want to go? Where do you want to end up? So we did a career audit, and I thought to myself, okay, I've done a PhD, I've researched school exclusion, I became an MLA, so I'm well known in the community. I interned with John McCain and worked in America, learned how to write policy, and I've really built my sphere of interest, sphere of influence. I've networked with everybody and anybody, including Hillary Clinton. So when I look back at this, I think, well, why did I do all this? I have a law degree. I could be a lawyer. I'm really creative. I could have followed my passion and gone into fashion, but I didn't. I could also have been like most of our young people in Northern Ireland and left to travel the world, take an extended gap year, but I didn't. And here's why. When I finished my law degree, I started working in one of Northern Ireland's most renowned charities, the Extern organisation, for a project called the Pathways Project that works only with young people excluded from school. And it was here my value base really started to develop and grow. And I saw in these excluded young people the faces of my father, my uncles, my mum's friends, and other young people who had fallen away from the education system, who weren't included, who were left out. And in many ways, I saw in these young people myself. And I realised everything that I have done is actually centred around ending exclusion. I did the PhD to understand more about what young people were experiencing. I interned internationally to learn how to make policy from the best, Senator McCain. I became an MLA to change the law on school exclusion, and I built my networks of influence so that I could raise awareness about school exclusion. So guess what Nikki said? Your purpose is to end school exclusion. That's your North Star. You know your general direction. You know your North Star. It's not going to change. So now we have our compass. We have our North Star. What am I missing? I'm missing my roadmap. Cue Cara Mackin. And poor Cara, I've had her head tortured. She's a really successful businesswoman, really well known, delivers for her clients, is so impressively incredible. I said, Cara, I need certainty. I need a roadmap. Show me how to become a successful entrepreneur. And poor Cara, she said, look, Patricia, there is nothing really that's certain in life. The only three things I can tell you that are certain in life are death, taxes, and uncertainty. So if you want a roadmap, you're going to have to plot your own course. And more importantly, you need to ponder these three questions. Number one, how do you want to die? Pretty morbid, but pretty important. If we're going to dedicate our life to being leaders and entrepreneurs and the best we can be, why? Will it matter when it comes to the last days of our lives? Next, controversial one, but an important one. How much tax do you want to pay? Hope I don't offend anybody when I say not that much, and I'll explain why in a minute. And last but not least, how will you cope with the inevitability of change? And here we are, a couple of weeks' work, and this is how I've worked out I want to die. And there's so much comfort in having your gravestone already written. You will see on screen it says, herein lies Professor Patricia O'Lynn McDonald. Patricia rests peacefully, knowing that she lived a full life and left nothing behind. She was a mother, a daughter, and a wife, but more importantly, an all-round firecracker. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, God help my boyfriend, because we're not engaged yet, but we'll be married by the time the end comes. But more importantly, it says this to me. It makes sense as to why I'm so anxious and driven and doing all the things I've done and make myself unwell, because when it comes to the end of my life, I want to lie surrounded by my family in a bed with floral bed sheets and think to myself, I did it my way. Everything is all used up. I was a firecracker. I did everything I could, and I loved the people that mattered to me the most in the process. I was a wife. I was a leader and a businesswoman. I was a mother, but more importantly, I lit the northern stars for all the other young people out there who are currently lost in the wilderness. Let's talk about tax. So, controversial figure, AOC, but wearing a great dress, and you know I love fashion, and this is why I don't want to pay tax. Did you know that the lifetime costs of excluding one child from school in terms of services is about £370,000, and that's a conservative estimate made by the Institute of Public Policy Research in England, not in Northern Ireland. What we know about Northern Ireland is things are more complex, they're more divided, so the costs are probably 3 times this per young person. I've sat around, near or at the tables where our politicians make decisions about how they spend our money, our tax-paying money. This is why I want to pay as little tax as possible, because my life is now dedicated to reducing these ridiculous costs of excluding young people. And last but not least, how will I cope with uncertainty? Well, this one's interesting as well. I don't want to just cope with uncertainty or change. I want to deal in and with disruption. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm really proud to say that this year I'm going to be launching my first business called the Institute for Disruption, which exists to challenge the status quo, enact school systems change, reframe persistently disruptive behaviour as a force for social good, and ultimately end the use of school exclusion. So was I lost in the wilderness? Was I burnt out? Yeah, I was. But I was really lucky because I had some flares I could set off to get some help. And what I want to say to everybody that's here today and online is, if you get lost in the wilderness, and part of me hopes that you will, let me reassure you, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You should have some flares you can set off to get some help. You will not die. You'll come back stronger. And more importantly, those who get lost in the wilderness will find new ways. And that's what I'm trying to achieve with my business, the Institute for Disruption. Find a new way for our young people. And so today, once we finish, we're going to have a look at working out our own compasses and then potentially our North Stars. How do we work out our North Star? People get freaked out when it comes to a sense of purpose. I would invite you to sit quietly and think to yourself, I'm at the end of my life. Imagine you're in those last days. What will you regret if you don't do? What matters to you? What matters less? And we've got some gravestones on the tables that you can work on. And then when it comes to working out your compass, we've also got some values on the table that we're going to help you whittle down as well. But very briefly, in terms of working out your North Star and finding your compass, well then how do you align it with your business? This is where things get a little bit boring. I'm not telling you anything new here. This is in all the literature about leadership and management. But if you want to align your values to your business, there's really 3 things you need to do. You need to focus on your culture, because what do we know about culture? It eats strategy for breakfast. So make sure your values are infused in every aspect of your business. When it comes to your employees, you need to focus on empowerment, empowerment, empowerment. Set them free to plot their own course, but make sure they all know what your Northern Star is. And last but not least, it relates back to my value of sincerity. Be absolutely transparent in your communication. Anchor everything that you say and do in what it is that you value, and ask people to repeat back to you, how do they anchor their work that they're doing for your business within that value set? More importantly, when it comes to communication, the power of 3 is prevalent again. Make sure you're internally reiterating every single day, this is what we value, this is why we do things, this is how we do it. It relates back to your values and then leads into your branding. Everything that you value should be present in your branding and also in the way that you engage with your customers. And if you're not sold, the power of 3 again, let me tell you why you align your business to your values. It'll make your workplace more cohesive. It'll enhance your reputation, and it'll also increase your resilience. And my goodness, in the present day, that's 3 things that we really badly need. So take some action, start evaluating and adapting, reflect on where you are, what needs to change, lead by example, and then last but not least, empower others to do the exact same. At this point, I'm going to say thank you everyone for taking the time to listen. And if there are any questions, please put them to me right now. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Oh my goodness, Patricia, I have so many questions, but I'm going to restrain myself and just see if anyone online or in the room would like to ask a question, and I will bring you the microphone. We're probably all absorbing just everything you've told us there, because there's a lot of emotional resonance as well, Patricia, with what you've said.
That was a tactic just to bamboozle you all, so I couldn't get any questions.
I don't think we have. I can see we've got 12 people watching, so please don't be shy. So if you would like, if anyone would like to put a question, I'm going to put a question to you, Patricia, actually, from watching all of that. So you talked about, going forward, there's the North Star, there's the compass, and then there's the managing uncertainty. Do you have tools or strategies that you use when you are feeling, how do you navigate that uncertainty, or what are your tools and strategies?
So I think the best piece of advice was given to me by another mentor I have called Barbara Stevenson. She's out there listening and watching, hi. But she said to me the most difficult things she's had to navigate, changes in her career, have led to sleepless nights and more often than not zero-sum situations. She reverts back to her value base and gets really quiet and sits and listens to herself. And then she does a stereotypical thing that the women in my family do, is she talks to everybody about it and asks their opinions. And guess what? It doesn't make a blind bit of difference. She goes back to her values and she usually takes the decision that is the best one for her, the one that's right, usually the most difficult, is going to end up with the most damaging consequences, but it's the right thing to do. And how she prepares for that is thinking through the consequences that are going to come or could come, right from the very worst that could happen to the least worst, and then she's not surprised whenever it occurs. The thing that I loved about that piece of advice is she's told me not to shy away from adversity or making the right decisions in line with your values. But she also says be prepared for the sleepless nights, because there's an inevitability about them. There's no straight or easy way through. But the grace comes from looking back in your career and thinking, I did that right. I did it my way. You don't sacrifice what you believe in to keep a job or, to keep people on side, to get them to like you. You do the right thing. You have sleepless nights and you be prepared for the consequences when they come. And the very last thing that I will say, because I know I talked about death a lot in the presentation, but in terms of the changes that come in your career, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to result in death. So guess what? Once you're done thinking about it, go home and enjoy time with your loved ones.
Yeah, so keep in perspective. Basically, that's so important. No, thank you so much for sharing that. Any other questions before I put another one for Patricia? No. Gosh, I'm going to go all day here. I'll ask you one or two more, and then we'll let you get on to the activity. I suppose, just in terms of, you've covered so much there. In terms of the business that you're launching and setting up, could you just tell us a little bit more about? So it's sort of a social justice business. Could you tell us a little bit more about what kind of things you'll be doing through that business?
Yeah, of course. So the Institute for Disruption was formed to end school exclusion. But the way I want to end school exclusion is not just by going in and working with young people, because there's a big misunderstanding at the minute that young people are excluded because they're either bad, they're mad, or they're sad. And the way that justification comes about is they exhibit difference. So they exhibit challenging behaviour, which says that they're different. Then they end up being medicalised, framed as criminal, i.e. dangerous, or disordered because they're deviating from the norm. So nobody in education wants disruption, which is really interesting, because in business, particularly big business, particularly tech, everybody wants disruption. That's all they want. So what do we see? We see the most disruptive young people being quashed down, being pushed out, being excluded and marginalised. And at the same time, we see this thirst and desire for disruption in every other sector in society. So my idea is this: why don't we empower excluded young people and ask them for their opinions and their perspectives on what's causing exclusion? Let's take those opinions and perspectives, form them into policy positions, and then change the law on what exclusion is, and at the same time coach, mentor, and lead young people so that they can set up their own organisations, enterprises, or social change initiatives. Now, some of the tools that I'm planning to use to do that are really 3 things. Number 1, I want to set up what's called citizen juries across Northern Ireland. Go into the pupil referral units and have young people perform the role of a jury, call in expert witnesses, and start debating and reaching deliberations from their opinions about whether or not school exclusion should be banned. The big political questions about unity, about the economy, about where we go in society in light of AI and globalisation, and see what disruptive solutions they can come up with. So that's number 1. Number 2, I want to design and launch an app called Exclusion Watch, where educators, parents, and children who have been or experienced exclusion can log their experience on the app, which will give us a fuller data picture of what's happening across Northern Ireland, and then use that information to enact social change. And then last but not least, empower young people to show more leadership in their lives after exclusion, harness their lived experiences to create podcasts, weekly bulletins, and then also cultural change programs, which will then sell to schools as well as businesses that want to be disrupted and understand the value of it. So I feel like I've talked a lot there, but it makes sense to me.
So just a few simple things, really, nothing too big picture. No, amazing. Thank you so much. Well, look, if there's no more questions, I think we'd all be really excited to have a go at the activity, unless there are any final questions. No, we'll hand back over to you, Patricia.
Okay, so I think what we'll do at this point in time is say goodbye to our friends that are online, because we can't do the activity online. It's just in person. So it was lovely to see you online, and hopefully we'll see you again. For everybody that remains in the room, you will see on your tables little